Welcome. Thanks everyone for joining us to another session of Listening to Conversations That Matter with Dr. Larry Crabbe, brought to you by Larger Story. This is actually part 2 of the webinars that we did last week, where Larry talked about some of the changes that are happening and some of the transitions that are happening. And so give you a quick little short recap about what he said in respect to some of that is he's not going to be doing any more live events anymore, any more SSDs, any more next steps. So he has transitioned out of NewWay Ministries. And what we're going to talk about today is what's going to happen next. So we've started a ministry called Larger Story. Larger Story happened about 5 years ago, where a good friend of mine who I've known since I was a little kid, he and I were friends in elementary school. His wife said to him, "What's going to happen when Larry's no longer around to continue teaching and thinking about what he's been doing for so long that's had impact on us?" And he said to me, "What do you think about that?" And I said, "Well, let's get something started." And one of the people that was really helpful, hugely responsible for that is Carlene Cannon. You can see her on the screen there. And she is part of our Larger Story team. So Carlene has a lot to do with what we're doing now and some of the inspiration behind starting Larger Story up, which has been really cool. I also want to introduce you to Chris Gamble. Chris has been part of the team since June of 2018, and he has been a huge part of what we're doing, and I'm super grateful to Chris. And so what we're going to do this next year as we transition from NewWay Ministries to Larger Story, there's going to be a lot of different things that are happening. You can see here on screen that we've been in process of thinking about Larger Story and what we're going to do for quite a while now. And I think we've got a pretty good plan, and we've got an idea of how we can hopefully utilize Larry in the next little bit and then start to expand beyond him in ways that allow some of you who have some things to say as well to be part of our platform. So we offer a couple of different things, but one of the things that might be important to you all is, where does NewWay Ministries still fit into this whole deal? And so where we are now is taking NewWay Ministries, and it will now sit underneath the umbrella of Larger Story. And I want to introduce Chris. And Chris, can you tell us a little bit about some of our plans as we move forward here?
I can. Let me get back to full screen. Well, hey, everybody. Good to be here. Yeah, so one of the things that you may realize is many of you who are on this first heard about Larry potentially in your 20s, 30s, 40s, and now as time progresses, you're no longer the next generation, and which is awesome. And one of the things we hope to do is take Larry's teaching to the next generation, so millennials and Gen Z, and so that they can get a chance in their 20s and 30s and 40s to be transformed in a similar way that you have through what God has to offer through Larry. And so this is just a little visual representation of that, and the size of audience we hope to reach over the next years. And then, so as Kep mentioned, we are sort of in our planning phase 2. And if you can see around this little wheel here, we've got sort of 6 pillar programs that we hope to roll out over the coming years. Some of them already are in existence, and some of them are essentially in the idea stage. As Kep mentioned, we've got so NewWay will move under Larger Story as our spiritual direction arm. There's really already a foundation laid and a legacy established there, and we don't want to get rid of, something that God has really established in the Christian community across the world. So we'll have something called NewWay Spiritual Communities, and we're not 100% sure what God will do with that, but we do have an online version of the School of Spiritual Direction that Kep and Larry shot about 4 or so years ago. And we actually haven't even gone live with it yet. And we're still sort of planning out what that'll look like in its final format. But that's one of the things that we hope to offer through the NewWay spiritual communities. And we have spiritual direction on our website where you can go on and meet with one of our directors, and then some other things there. So we've got Larger Story Press. That's where we've published Waiting for Heaven. Larry, as you've heard, Larry's got a couple other books that are almost in their finished format already. He's writing voraciously, and we believe God is writing through him, and are excited for that. Further down in field of view for us in the Larger Story Press, we may hope to take folks like you who are aspiring authors or authors and build upon the thinking and teaching that Larry's done. So we haven't figured out that framework or process, so that may be in the future, but that's something we're hoping to accomplish. And then events with COVID, we don't know what events will look like. Maybe they're Zoom events, or maybe there's some smaller in-person ones down the road, to be determined there. Subscriptions might be something where you can come to the Larger Story website and participate in a monthly or annual subscription and get access to, a robust library of Larry's teachings and articles and talks all the way back to about when Jesus was walking on earth. So just kidding, Larry. And then partner programs. We want to create programs where Larger Story can partner with churches and counseling programs and be a resource to them through the teaching and spiritual direction that we offer. So that's high level where we're headed. Carlene, anything you want to add there? Larry?
No, I'm very excited about that. I really am so grateful that you guys have come up with a way to give me a legacy. I really do believe that God has given me a couple of thoughts that have been useful for his purposes, and to realize that I'm no longer going to be doing any live events, but live events that I have done on recordings will be available to push through to a larger audience and maybe get some of the limited wisdom, but maybe some real wisdom occasionally that the Lord's given me to teach. So I'm thrilled with Larger Story, and I'm so supportive of it. And my next step, my transition from NewWay, is directly into Larger Story, and I couldn't be more pleased with the opportunities God has given me to move through Larger Story.
And some of you don't know that we did capture, Chris mentioned the SSD material on video in a 20 session shoot. And so we're in the process now of, we've piloted that group with a number of different people. About 33 people went through the group through all 20 sessions, gotten some great feedback on that. We're going to be designing that in a way that hopefully can appeal a little bit to a more younger generation, and how we package that. And that's going to be something that'll be happening now, especially since Larry won't be doing the SSDs or Next Steps anymore live. So we'll still have access to that material, and hopefully give you access to that, and you can go through that material with the community that you guys are doing life with. So we're excited about some of the course developments. That's just one of the courses that we've got ideas on. We've got several that are in the can, ready to go. We just need to get ready to release those. So a lot of different things in the works. Carlene, is there anything you wanted to say? No.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, we're just very energized and excited to make as much of this available as possible. And we appreciate everyone's support. In fact, I just noticed someone in the chat mentioned bringing their own children into the brainstorming, and boy, we are open to any of that input. That's very exciting to us, and that's where our heart is to make this thinking and information and these ideas as accessible as possible to a younger, wider audience. So we're counting on you guys to help us with that. So thank you.
So everybody, this is the Larger Story team. We wanted to introduce you guys to them today. And as you know, we're talking about listening to conversations that matter. So our special guest today is a good friend of the Crabbe families. James Tripp Moore is going to be joining Larry today and chatting about some of this kind of stuff. Tripp, it's so good to see you, my brother.
Good to see you. Good to be a part of this today, too.
I'm starting to really enjoy this Zoom stuff. I didn't know if we would catch on, and I figure when we got Dad doing this, if we can get him to do this with this kind of stuff, I think almost anybody can do it. So
Miracle of the Red Sea.
it is a Red Sea miracle to have him on the Zoom conference calling here. So Dad, I want to give you the platform here for a little bit.
All right. Well, some of you may have heard many months ago that Tripp, that's how he goes by now. He lives in Quebec, and he's James Moore up here, but we've known him as Tripp since I've met him. Some of you have heard that, perhaps. Some of you haven't. So let me just introduce Tripp to you very briefly. Tripp, when he was about probably 40 some years ago, just married, and they were having a bit of a go of it in their marriage, and they found one of my books and said, this seems a little different. And they came down to Boca Raton, Florida, where I was in private practice. And the Lord just made a choice. He happened to use me, but it was the Lord's doing to restore their marriage. And now, many, many years later, they're happily married and doing great. So I'm very happy about that. And then Tripp got very interested in how to counsel. And so I was director of a master's in biblical counseling. And he came and proved to be one of our very finest students. He's very bright and very thoughtful. And so he became first my client, my patient, if you want to use big professional terms. And then he became my student. But then he became my friend in a very unusual way. Some of you have heard the story, some of you haven't. I was speaking in Boston. It was Boston, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. Yes. And it was my first time, this is years ago, to speak to a huge crowd of 6,000 people. And I was a little nervous about that. I'd never spoken to an audience that size. But after I gave my first talk with my picture on a big Teletron, 20 times its normal size, and I wasn't very fond of looking at it, which I couldn't if I turned around, it's on the back of my head. But after I finished that talk, Tripp and I had breakfast the next morning. And after we had our breakfast finished, Tripp said to me something I did not expect at all. He said, "Can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Sure," thinking he was asking his professor, his psychologist, a question that only I could answer. But what he asked was this: when you got behind the podium to speak to 6,000 people, why did you expect everyone to hate you? And I thought, what on earth are you talking about? Don't take me on, man. I'm above you. I'm your professor. I'm your counselor. And he persisted. And he really, as he persisted and kind of moved me away from my objections and resistance, I began to realize that not only was I nervous, but I thought I had a message that nobody's going to want to hear. And I was very nervous about that. And I realized that I did expect everyone to maybe hate me too strong, maybe it wasn't. And at that point, he switched from my former counselee, from my former student, to a friend with the courage to take me on and to have a relationship. And after that conversation, I said, "Could we meet again tomorrow?" Because I really valued a friend who wasn't going to be intimidated by me. Nobody should be intimidated by me, but he certainly wasn't. And at first I wasn't grateful, but now I'm very grateful. So for the last 40 years, he's been my best friend, and we've been talking a lot, and he's been visiting with Rachel and me down in Charlotte now for the last week. And we're very sorry he's leaving on Friday, because he and Judy have been wonderful friends. So it's been a good thing. But one of the things I want Tripp to think about and to talk about, he has taken, after listening to me teach SSC for probably 40 times as a spiritual director, and added a lot of thoughts of his own. He's very, very bright and very thoughtful, knows his Bible really well. And he's taken it cross-culturally. And I never thought about that. He lived in Brussels for 9 years, and he did some teaching over there. And I wanted to talk about that and what the impact was in a very cross-cultural, very French culture that I'm not familiar with at all, but he is very fluent in French as he lives now in Quebec. So tell us what it was like to take it cross-culturally, Tripp.
Well, I think the biggest thing that launched me was sitting through the schools and learning about the 7 questions of biblical theology that reveal the larger story. And over the years, I mean, I did 4 years for a number of years along with Mary Beth Niger, and it just started catching my attention more and more. I started to see it in the scriptures. I started seeing how central it was for everything, for the definition of the church life, of Christian life. And so I began, it started becoming mine, and I started really seeing it, not just feeling like I was repeating what someone else had taught.
Did you steal some of my stories?
Oh, rarely.
Rarely, thank you.
Yeah, but a few, because I didn't have any of my own, so I just took some of his. It worked really well. But anyway, so I was living in Quebec at the time, Quebec City, and was one of the leaders of a church there. And we started, another friend, Paul, Ron Paget, that we were both caught by this and started bringing it into the church. And that went really, really well until there was something that, like often happens in churches, and blocked it, and the whole thing just fell off. And that was when we ended up going to Belgium. And in Belgium, it was really exciting to see. The Belgian Christians were very, very hungry, very eager, very humble in a really good way. And so I started what I called the Barnabas Projects, just to come up with a name. And it basically was the same thing as the week-long thing, spread out over, the first one I did over 2 years. And after that, I realized that it didn't have to be that long. So I went to doing it a year, every Wednesday night for a year with breaks, for holidays.
How many folks did you get to come to that?
I think in the beginning we had over 100 from something like
Over
18 different
100.
churches. Yeah, your wife came and sat once. Rachel did, sat during one of the evenings. Didn't
Oh.
understand anything, but
Yeah, French, yeah.
and then I did it 2 other times a year instead of 2 years. And I think it triggered something. And there's something in that. If it really is the method to understanding what God's basic project is, what his passion is, it's so far from being secondary. And a whole lot of people caught on to this and got really excited. And one of the things too that I've done in the past, since I lived in the French world, is I've started a publishing house in '93. Basically, we started with your Marriage Builder book after God had used him to save our marriage after being married for 2 years and separated for 6 months. That's when we went down to see you.
I remember that clearly.
It wasn't a good start. But anyway, we've done a lot of your books. In fact, right now I'm just finished, while I'm here, page setting this book. And I bring it up. Larry's actually rereading it too, and enjoying reading his own book, because it's very, very powerful. And it's the only book that I know of where you actually go through and describe the 7 questions.
The 7 questions. I don't think I've ever, this might be wrong, but I don't think I've ever reread one of my books. And now that I'm rereading A Different Kind of Happiness, you've been telling me how you feel it's really one of my more important books. And I'm just reading it and saying, how on earth did I come up with that? Spirit of God, if you weren't there, I never would have even thought of any of that.
Yeah.
But there really is a different kind of happiness that has a whole lot to do with releasing what is alive in us because of the new covenant. And when that gets released from us, there's a joy that may not be just, happy, I'm feeling great, but a settled excitement about God is doing something through me into others.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of the theme of the book, I think, as I would put it that way.
Yeah. And that's the
Dad, I'm blown away that you haven't reread any of your material, any of your books. That's surprising to me, because I think I've read The Pressure's Off probably 5 times. Inside out at least twice, all the way through. So, and different kind of happiness. We have some people asking some questions. I do want to say to the people watching today, if you have some questions for Larry or for Tripp, please feel free. There's a Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. Click on that, write your question in. And if we've got time after the conversation today to answer some of those questions, we will. I know many of you have been asking questions about my wife. She's having a great day today and had a great day yesterday. So we're grateful. Continuing to battle, but a lot of you are asking questions about Larry's health. So if you want to ask any of those questions, please feel free to do that today as well. But I think one of the questions that I'd like to ask today really is of you, Tripp, as you've been with him now for the last week. You've had a chance to see that he's slowing down a little bit, probably physically. I would imagine you've seen some of that.
Mhm.
What is all this transition and NewWay no longer doing SSDs, which you were such a integral part of for so many years? What's that like to you, bro?
It's hard. I mean, I at some point I just couldn't do the 4 at a year, and so I backed off some from those, but I was still doing at least 1 a year, and I was also overseas for a good part of it. I think it's very sad, and it's part of what's motivated me to want to be here today to talk about ways that now that the SSDs are gone, the next steps are gone, there are tools through the Larger Story ministry that are available. And I really want to encourage people to, like you mentioned, the what's it called? The
Soul Care Experience?
Yeah, the Soul Care Experience. Well, no, it was actually, yeah, that, and also the fact that you've taped an
SSD, the School of Spiritual Direction, which we're still working on a title that'll maybe be a little more appealing. We've called it the in between life, in between the cross and the coming.
Yeah.
And that's what we've kind of been referring to it as, but we're not sure if that's what it's going to be when we finally let it go. But that's important material.
I really do believe that when I was able to give these 20 sessions that summarized SSD material, I really would claim that we got 85 to 90% of what SSD was all about had you been to one live. And I worked really hard, I really did, in coming up with 20 sessions that covered 85, 90% of what SSD was. So you can still go to an SSD by video and hear me teach. And we did it in a very interesting way. We had about 15 people that were the limited audience. That's all we wanted. And we had some interaction with them where they were asking questions and I was clarifying the questions. So I think it's a pretty complete representation of SSD. And I think it's going to be, I think it might be very, very useful. But I had a question of you quickly, Tripp. What was the spiritual culture in Brussels that made them open to SSD type material? Where were they? What was church and spiritual journey and the Christian life like over there?
You know, I don't know if I can explain the why. I do remember they had invited to fly me over to do a weekend, which they'd done in earlier years a few times. And this was after things had kind of gone south in our church in Quebec, and I'd pulled back from the leadership. And during that weekend, I just became aware of how hungry these people were, eager and with hearts. I don't know why.
So they hadn't heard it before.
No, and generally there were some good churches and good people, but this brings it together in a way that it's not just scattered truth. It builds on something, a foundation, and they tuned into that. And one of the things I wanted to say too is that one of the things that hit us from the beginning of the SSDs is that we sat down and planned them. You and I did it together.
We did. We worked hard on that.
And we hardly ever changed anything. And almost every time it was like God did amazing things with maybe a couple of people exceptions per time.
Yeah, not many.
But it was so obvious that God was using that. And I think it makes sense because the 7 questions, the answers to the 7 questions do describe the whole project of God. And and so it opens the path to walk where God wants us to do what he wants us to do and to find his accompanying power in our lives. So that's why I would encourage people to, one of the things that really disappointed me about the timing is Judy and I have been wanting to send our youngest daughter and her husband, Eric and Rachel, to an SSD, and they had 3 girls under 6, and it was, a really big deal. And then COVID hit. So now at least I know that they'll have the opportunity to
get a good portion of it.
Yeah, good. And that's why I mentioned this book too, because in there, you have a chapter for each one of the 7 questions, and you come away with a bigger sense of what God's up to.
Yeah. And you can get that book right now on largerstory.com.
Right.
Let me just talk to a few of the people that are out there, because there may be some people that are watching today that don't know what we're talking about when we keep referring to this SSD. And I know many of you do know what we're talking about, but it's the School of Spiritual Direction that Larry has done for the last several years. He's done 76 total of them. And this is what he talked about last week, and that he won't be doing those live anymore. And I know that some of you are disappointed because you've saw that down the road that you've wanted to try to jump in this, and a lot of the things that happened to Larry kind of came on him quickly. And so that's changed, and we're excited to hopefully offer you another opportunity to go through that in maybe a little bit of a different setting. There's also been some questions will Larger Story continue to offer the spiritual formation, spiritual director certificate? And we will. We are going to continue to offer that with our daily bread. And we're working on some of the details on that now, but I've been chatting with our daily bread people, and they are eager to continue that as well. So if you're in the midst of that certification process now, you can continue to go through it, and it will be good. So we're going to continue to offer that as well. So
Can I put something there, Cap, just about
Yeah.
that? That's what was called the soul care experience, I believe. And when it first came out, when I was there, when they were taping it in the living room in Denver.
Oh, yeah.
And I can't remember, 13 videos. And the reason I bring it up is that my wife, since we've been back in Quebec, she's gathered a group of maybe 10 women, and they have gone through that whole series in English. These were people that can actually, obviously function in English, otherwise it wouldn't work. But it has had a really big impact on a lot of these gals' lives and stirring their hearts. So that's another tool that you can get through the Larger Story that can make a really big difference.
And what we're hoping to do, Trip, just to kind of segue off what you just said, is we're hoping that maybe we can even link in the School of Spiritual Direction material, the in-between life stuff, with what Dad put together earlier. And it's actually the soul care course on christiancourses.com, and which is all through our daily bread and that group there as well. But so if we can kind of combine those in some ways to really make that a real effective program, I think that could be really fun. We're thinking through what that will look like now as well.
And I do think that all of this is God's mysterious leading. I know most of you know this. Let me say it briefly, that the reason NewWay is no longer functioning with schools and next steps and all that is because of some real health challenges that God has allowed. I don't believe he caused, but has allowed to come my way. I've got neuropathy, which makes walking very difficult. I've got ongoing cancer that is needing treatment. I now have a lot of difficulty sleeping, and that's been very difficult. And I haven't slept well for about 3 or 4 months, so I'm tired all the time. And then lastly, I now have diabetes, which requires pinpricks every day and a careful diet. And it really has weakened me so much, muscle weakness and all that, that it became very clear that I simply would not be able to continue NewWay Ministries, which I kind of tentatively, without God's clear direction, thought that maybe I would be doing it till I was age 80 and then stop doing them. But I had to stop doing them. Now I'm 76. But it really feels, I don't like my problems. I don't like them at all. I'm very weak and have a lot of struggles with my life right now. But it really seems to be very clear that it's God's movement to move me toward full-time ministry as much as I can do. And I can still do quite a lot with Larger Story. And I couldn't be more glad, privileged, happy. I really am that this medium, Zoom is not my favorite thing to do, but I'm really glad that I can do that now. And I can bring a lot to Larger Story, as well as others are going to think way beyond what I've been thinking, could bring a lot to Larger Story as well. So that's the brief description of why Larger Story is going to be my sphere of influence for a while, as long as God gives me the opportunity to do so, and others will take over in wonderful ways. And I'll be eliminating, obviously, no more speaking events and no more SSDs or next step conferences. So that's the brief of it. That's what we covered last time.
Well, and one of the things that's really exciting to us is even sitting next to the guy you're sitting next to now, is you've got a vast legacy of people who you've influenced, Dad. And we're seeing that now even more so after you made that announcement last week. And so it's exciting for us to see how we can tap into those resources and tap into guys like Trip, and where there might be possibilities to even do virtual next steps where we can continue to do some of these kind of things. I see some questions coming up of people asking, so we're not going to be doing next steps anymore. Well, Larry won't, but there's other people that may have the opportunity to follow up with some of the materials that we've developed and do these kind of things and continue to develop what's next. Because I can tell you that the next step was the follow-up to what was happening at the School of Spiritual Direction, because we realized that what happens when people go after the week-long school? What's next? And they go home and they have this new vernacular and they have this new jargon that they're talking about, and our red dot and relational sin and relational holiness, out of these things. And so that's where Next Step was kind of birthed, is to how do you really get into these conversations that put Jesus on display?
And as you're saying all
kind
that,
of cool things.
there's kind of maybe a new thought developing in my mind that may be possible, maybe kind of a dream that won't come true. But the last Next Step that I did, I don't know when it was, a year ago, I suppose.
November.
It was November, yeah. I worked like a maniac to rewrite everything I had done in the first 13 Next Steps. And I came up with, I think, a really good presentation of material in the Next Step. And the thought that's occurring to me, maybe I could get behind a camera and do a Next Step seminar on video. And that's a brand new thought as of 10 seconds ago. So we'll see if that materializes or not. But I could be drawn to doing that so people could have next steps as well as School of Spiritual Direction. We'll have to wait and see on that. No promises, no guarantees, but just a thought for the moment.
And I just had a thought too, just sort of out of nowhere, that it might be interesting if you could put together a Larry Crabbe reading list. One of the things over the years that has kept us on the same wavelength is that we share books. We read a book and say, wow, and we read it, and there's been a number of very important books.
Yeah.
And that would be fun to have available through through the larger story too.
Why don't you put that together, Trip, and we'll put it up on the site.
Well, yeah, I could work with him and do that. So.
Yeah.
Done.
We have a couple of books that when I read a difficult book that's worth the time to read, I call it a chewy book. It's not one you read through like a Baldacci novel. It's one you have to ponder.
Like Moltmann.
And there's one book that Tripp just mentioned to me. We both have the same idea. A German theologian named Jürgen Moltmann has a book called
Trinity and the Kingdom of God.
Trinity and the Kingdom of God. It's a profound book. Michael Reeves has a wonderful book whose title I can't recall.
No, there's one, I know it in French, but I don't know it in English.
Well, we just gave you guys an activity to do this evening. Before
Yeah, right.
There you go.
dinner, sit down and get a pen out and write down all those books, give them to me, and we'll put them up online.
Good idea. We can do that.
What you guys are doing and continue to read. That's a great idea, Trip. Those are the kind of things that we've been really doing with Larger Story. It's really been kind of fun to see how this has progressed and what the Lord's really chosen to do. In several ways, it's been the hardest thing I've ever done trying to get this started. And in several ways, it's been very rewarding because of the influence that Dad's had on my life. And for, one of the driving forces behind Larger Story has been that if and when Dad passes away and this message passes away with him. And I said, that would not be good. So we're going to continue to carry on and continue to move forward and use the people that have been trained and have studied and have read and have grappled with all of this stuff and continue to hopefully light the Trinity.
Yeah, the name of that book by Michael Reeves, by the way, is Delighting in the Trinity.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember talking to a young Christian woman. She was probably in her 30s, I suppose, not really young, but and we were having dinner at a Thanksgiving table, and I was talking to somebody next to me about Michael Reeves' book, Delighting in the Trinity. And she looked at me and she said, how do you do that? What does it mean to delight in the Trinity? He's, Father, Son, and Spirit. I got to get on with my life. And I said, I think you're missing out on a lot. You might want to take a look at the book. And she got turned on by it. It's really a very accessible book. He's a scholar, but he writes very accessibly, unlike Moltmann, who doesn't write as accessibly, but he writes wonderfully. So there's a lot of books, and we'll get them listed out. That'll be fun to do, actually. We'll have a good time doing that.
Dad, I'm looking at some questions that some people just asked, and I want to ask you a question that came in. What's it like to see your sons, both of them, inherit transform before your eyes into men that seem so free to jump into their parents' lives, but even more importantly, jump into God's? They're our Father's lap and yearn to live in the larger story. Talk about what that's like. I saw that question. I just wanted to ask it.
Well, you're on the verge of bringing me to an emotional part. I don't know much that I'm more grateful for, other than salvation and my wife, for having two boys that are now men, 52 and 50, who are very serious about the Lord and who think really well, and kept the way you're handling what your wonderful wife is going through. Most of you know perhaps that she's had 4th stage breast cancer.
Lung cancer.
Lung cancer, I'm sorry. And she's going through immunization treatments that are looking optimistic, but no guarantees are coming. But I just so clearly remember when I said to you, Kep, I'm so burdened for you when we first got this really terrible news. And you said, oh, Dad, this is a gift. I'm going, a gift? It's the kind of gift I don't want to get. And you said, no, it's a gift for me to become the man I long to be with my wife. It's a gift to be with her. It's a gift to love her. It's a gift to walk through the larger story with her, knowing that God is telling a story that's bigger than her cancer, and that we're all going to die someday. And, you know, we don't want to die, as we would call it, prematurely. She might, but she might not, because the immunization treatments are looking rather good at the moment. But you took it on as an opportunity. And ever since that word opportunity came up, that's become a very special word with me, with my health struggles, which I don't like at all. I wish that God would heal me, but he's not going to do it, is my expectation. If he does, I'm going to say good, but I don't think he will, because I do think there's an opportunity in this. And the opportunity that I'm seizing right now is a book that I'm almost completed called It's Too Much. You know, too many things go wrong for us to persevere with Christianity. You got to wonder if God really loves us because he allows too much to happen to us. In my case, health challenges. In some of the cases of people that are listening right now, the death of a spouse at a young age, maybe even the death of a child. So many horrible things happen in life, and God allows them. He doesn't cause them, but he permits them. And if everything that happens is not an opportunity for something that at the deepest part of my soul I want, then I'm going to have trouble persevering in Christianity. But because I do believe that everything that happens creates an opportunity to illustrate the way Christ handled his too much opportunities, like, you know, the wilderness experience, which was not too much for him, even though it was 40 days and 40 nights being quizzed and challenged by the devil. That was a too much experience that Jesus sailed right through. And Gethsemane, when he talked to his father about how hard it was to go to the cross, and was just anticipating being separated from his father. And what an opportunity for him to stand up at one point and say, gentlemen, you've fallen asleep on me. I asked you to stay awake, but now stay awake now because I'm standing up after lamenting how difficult my cross experience is going to be. And I'm going to walk to see the people that are going to kill me. And this is an opportunity to fulfill my Father's plan to save people. And I thought there was no too much opportunity that got in the way of the Lord fulfilling his mission. And then the 3 hours of darkness when the Father pulled away from him and Satan had full sway to him in hell for 3 hours. Talk about a too much experience that the Lord moved through perseveringly. And it made me realize that to the degree that I'm conformed to the image of Christ, there's no experience that feels like too much, even though my health feels like too much many times during every day. It never need be too much for me to persevere. And that's kind of where I'm thinking now. The last chapter in the book, It's Too Much, which I'm working on now, is where was I when all these health issues came into my life? And I was not in a good place. And I talk about that in my last chapter. But where am I now? I'm in a much better place. And I'm really believing that I'd like my life, and this is kind of my sentence that I'm opening the part of the last chapter with, that I want to be a visible witness to others of God's grace that takes me at my worst and guarantees me heaven because of his forgiveness. And I want to be a visible representative to others of his purpose. And his purpose is not to keep me healthy. If that were his purpose, I'd be healthier right now, but I'm going to be healthy in heaven, obviously. So I am waiting for heaven rather eagerly, groaning now, but waiting eagerly for them. But I want to put on display the purpose of God, which is to form me into the man that I most want to be. And the way I've put it to my wife, I'm not the man that I was, but I can be a better man than I've ever been. And that's what God is working on and giving me the opportunity of the It's Too Much book to think about. And then the last section of the book is, where do I wish I were that I'm not yet at? I'm not where I want to be, not fully, but I think I'm moving in that direction. So the last chapter is my way of saying, I think the book, It's Too Much, is moving me toward the opportunities that God wants to give me to become the man that I really most long to be. And there's times I feel joy about that. There's times I wish I could walk better. There's times I wish I didn't have cancer, of course. There's times I didn't have neuropathy, never pronounce it right. And I sure wish I didn't have diabetes, but everything's an opportunity. And sometimes I'm really grateful for it. Sometimes not so much. But the book has been meaning a great deal to me. And I hope it's a book that you'll have a chance to read and maybe encourage you when you face your too much experiences in life, because they always come eventually. Just a few thoughts on the book.
Yeah, one of the things that occurs to me as I hear you talking, Dad, is that I think that some of the best is still going to come out of you, and I'm seeing a little bit of that now. I thought Waiting for Heaven was a little bit of that. Off Track, I think, had a little bit of that. But what's coming out of you now, in respect to what I think the Spirit's giving you, is what I'm so excited for what Larger Story has the opportunity to do in the next year. Because you're not dead yet, and we want to capture everything we can off you. And the fact that we're doing these kind of things and we record them, when you teach the scriptures, like when you're doing the 7 churches of Revelation and the church on trial, those are things that are gonna outlive all of us, hopefully. And so that's another thing that we've really dreamed about is having you teach the scriptures and capture all that. And I think what we'd love to do is do something even in respect to 66 Love Letters. That's one book that I know you said you haven't read any of your books back, but I think that's one that you've dove into a few times since you've written it.
I think that's true. I guess I got to take back what I said, because when I teach a Bible book, I look back and see what I said about that Bible book and 66 Love Letters, and
Yep.
get a little hint and then do my studies for it. But I'm not sure which I enjoy more. Do I enjoy more writing a book like It's Too Much, or do I enjoy more teaching the Bible? And it's kind of a toss-up, because I'm really enjoying. I come back, I go to breakfast out every morning and try to feel normal for a few minutes and read the newspaper and pay $2 for the Charlotte Observer to read the funnies. So that's my morning devotional time. But then when I come back from breakfast, I am so eager to make my way up the stairs, which is very difficult, but I hold on to the banister and I get upstairs and see all my pads of paper and my little light, and I start writing, finishing up It's Too Much. And then when it's time to do a remote Bible teaching series on Sardis, which is the next church I'm going to be looking at, where the Lord begins by saying, you think you are alive, but you're dead. And I'm not sure what I'm going to get out of that, but I'm going to study it and teach what the Lord has in mind for Sardis, because I think there are some churches, by no means all, there's some wonderful churches around, but I think there's some churches that are pretty dead because all they're doing is giving Christian tips to make your life easier and make your life better by enjoying the blessings of God. And they think they're alive, and I think they're dead to what God's purpose really, really is. So I'm looking forward to talking about that at sometime the next month, I guess.
Yeah. Well, Trip, is there anything you want to close us down with? We'll get ready to wrap here, but it's sure good to see you, brother. And I'm so glad you're there with Mom and Dad and your wife, Judy, having a good time with them.
We are, and I'm really glad to see you've taken the thing in hand, and there's a future for the legacy of your dad. I appreciate your doing that.
I'm privileged to do it, and I'm grateful to do it. So, folks, we sure appreciate you joining us today. As we wrap this session here, we just want to say, please stay healthy, stay holy. God loves you, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Let me say one thing real quick, and I know you don't want me to say it, but I want to say it. Over the last 20 years, we've been wonderfully supported by so many people. And all I want to say is no more money to NewWay. NewWay is defunct, sadly enough, but it is. But Larger Story really deserves the support of the Christian community, because I think it has potential to impact a lot of people across the world, way beyond my legacy, way beyond it, into many other spheres as well, but obviously including my legacy, which obviously I'm incredibly thrilled with. So Cap, I couldn't be more proud of you. Couldn't be more proud of Ken, who's working with Larger Story in a variety of ways. And you two guys are putting your hearts, mind, and souls into this ministry that I think could be very, very valuable in the Lord's hands, and that's where we want to leave it. So thank you all for listening. It's been great to be chatting with you.
That's very encouraging. I'm glad you all got a chance to meet Chris and meet Carlene as well. We will continue to let you know what's going on with Larger Story and what we're doing. So be looking for the next webinar coming soon. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.